said, "What's your name?" I says, "Johnny Weissmuller." He says, "Well, we're going to have to change that." I said, "What are you talking about?" "It won't go on a marquee." I says, "What's a marquee?"
Johnny Weissmuller wasn't just an Olympic champion and the iconic Tarzan, he was also a real-life hero, saving lives in moments of pure chaos. His son, Johnny Weissmuller Jr., carried on his father's adventurous spirit, diving into Hollywood and building a life full of his own twists and turns. But behind the fame and glory, both men faced tragedies that would forever change their lives. How did the man who seemed invincible on screen suffer such devastating losses, and what dark secrets haunted his family's legacy? Let me take you back to a time when one of the most iconic names in swimming was just beginning his journey. Johann Peter Weissmuller, known to the world as Johnny Weissmuller, was born on June 2, 1904, in Szabadfalva, a village in the Kingdom of Hungary, Austria-Hungary. Today you'd find that place in Romania, and it's now called Freidorf, a part of Timisoara. Back then it was home to an ethnically Banat Swabian family, which Johnny's family was part of. 6 generations of the Weissmullers had been born in Hungary, after their ancestor had moved from Baden around 1749. It's safe to say Johnny's roots ran deep in the region. Just 3 days after his birth, Johnny was baptized in the Catholic faith. But here's the interesting bit. The Hungarian version of his German name was used, so he became János. A year later, on January 26, 1905, his parents, Peter and Elizabeth Weissmuller, decided to pack their bags and head to America, looking for a better life. They took the young Johnny on a 12-day trip on the SS Rotterdam, making their way to Ellis Island, where so many immigrant families first stepped foot on U.S. soil. Windber, Pennsylvania was where they landed. This small coal mining town was already home to some of their relatives, so it made sense to settle there. But their family didn't stay small for long. The next year, in September 1905, Johnny's little brother Peter was born. Life must have been tough for the family, as it was for most immigrants back then, but they pressed on. 3 years later, when Johnny was still just a young boy, the Weissmuller family decided to relocate once again, this time to Chicago. They moved in with Johnny's maternal grandparents, hoping to carve out a better life in the bustling city. Chicago, with its sprawling neighborhoods and lakeside beaches, became the backdrop of Johnny's childhood. His family rented a single level in a shared house, a simple setup that many immigrant families lived in back then. But this time, something life-changing happened for Johnny. At age 9, he contracted polio, a disease that could have easily stopped him in his tracks. You can imagine how scared his parents must have been, but Johnny's doctor had a surprising suggestion: swimming. Swimming was recommended as a way to help Johnny recover, strengthen his body, and get him back on his feet. It turned out to be the perfect advice because Johnny didn't just recover, he thrived. He found himself at Fullerton Beach on Lake Michigan, taking his first swimming lessons. And let me tell you, Johnny wasn't just a kid who learned to swim. He became a kid who dominated the water. He fell in love with swimming right there on Lake Michigan, and it wasn't long before he started entering every race he could find, winning them all. But just as his swimming was taking off, Johnny's family life hit a serious bump. His father, Peter, abandoned the family when Johnny was in 8th grade. It's hard to imagine the pressure Johnny must have felt. He was just a kid, but now he had to step up as the man of the house. He dropped out of school to start working and support his mom and younger brother. But if you think that setback stopped him from swimming, you'd be wrong. It only made Johnny more determined. One story that sticks out from Johnny's early years is how he got into the YMCA. You see, Johnny was only 11 years old at the time, but the YMCA had a strict rule. You had to be at least 12 years old to join. Well, Johnny wasn't about to let that stop him. He lied about his age and got in, and of course he won every swimming race he entered there too. It wasn't just swimming that Johnny excelled at, though. He was a natural athlete, also taking up running and high jumping. Before long, Johnny had joined one of the best swim teams in the country, the Illinois Athletic Club. Johnny's swimming career really took off when he caught the eye of Bill Bachrach, a swimming coach who would become a huge part of his life. Bill wasn't just a coach, though. He became a mentor and father figure to Johnny, someone Johnny could look up to and rely on, especially after his own father had walked out on him. Johnny's potential in the pool became undeniable. The date, August 6, 1921, marks the official beginning of Johnny's competitive swimming career. He was just 17 years old when he entered his first big meet, 4 Amateur Athletic Union (AAU) races. Did he win? Of course he did. He not only won all 4 races, but he also set his first 2 world records at the AAU Nationals just a month later on September 27, 1921. His records in the 100m and 150-yard freestyle events were the first signs that Johnny wasn't just any swimmer, he was something special. Now, if you thought Johnny was just going to stop there, you're in for a surprise. Just a year later, on July 9, 1922, Johnny broke Duke Kahanamoku's world record in the 100-meter freestyle. Duke was a swimming legend at the time, and when Johnny beat his record with a time of 58.6 seconds, it was clear that Johnny Weissmuller was about to become the new king of the pool. And sure enough, at the 1924 Summer Olympics in Paris, Johnny won the gold medal in the 100-meter freestyle, again beating Duke Kahanamoku. But Johnny didn't stop at just one gold. At those same Olympics, he also won the gold in the 400-meter freestyle and was part of the U.S. team that took gold in the 4x200-meter relay. The man was unbeatable, and his star was rising fast. 4 years later, Johnny returned to the Olympics in Amsterdam. And guess what? He won 2 more gold medals, cementing his legacy as one of the greatest swimmers of all time. This was also around the time Johnny became interested in John Harvey Kellogg's ideas about a holistic lifestyle. If the name Kellogg sounds familiar, that's because he's the guy behind Kellogg's cereals. But he was also big on things like nutrition, exercise, and even enemas. Johnny got into this lifestyle too, and it's said to have helped him stay at the top of his game. One of Johnny's most impressive feats came in 1927, when he set a new world record in the 100-yard freestyle, swimming it in just 51.0 seconds. That record stood for 17 years. It wasn't until 1940 that Johnny, now 36 years old, improved it to 48.5 seconds at the Billy Rose World's Fair Aquacade. However, this time it didn't officially count, because by then Johnny was considered a professional swimmer. But Johnny wasn't just about individual accomplishments. He was also part of the U.S. men's national water polo team and won a bronze medal at the 1924 Summer Olympics. He competed again in water polo at the 1928 Olympics, but the U.S. team finished in 7th place that time. Johnny's swimming career was filled with record-breaking performances. He won 5 Olympic gold medals, 1 bronze medal, and 52 U.S. national championships. He set a staggering 67 world records in swimming. What's even more impressive, he never lost a race in his entire amateur career. When he retired, he did so as the greatest swimmer of his time, and in 1950 the Associated Press named him the greatest swimmer of the first half of the 20th century. You might think winning 5 Olympic gold medals would be the peak for anyone, but not for Johnny. In fact, it was just the start of the next chapter in his life, one that would take him to Hollywood. His first taste of the movie business came with a small role in the film Glorifying the American Girl. Johnny didn't have any lines in that movie. It was more about showing off his impressive physique. In one scene, he was dressed as Adonis, wearing nothing but a fig leaf and lifting actress Mary Eaton on his shoulders. That scene didn't make him a star overnight, but it did catch the attention of an important Hollywood writer, Cyril Hume. Thanks to Hume, Johnny landed his big break. He was cast in Tarzan the Ape Man, released in 1932. If you've ever thought of Johnny Weissmuller, chances are that Tarzan image immediately pops into your head. It's hard to imagine anyone else playing the role. This was a major film, based on Tarzan of the Apes by Edgar Rice Burroughs, and it was one of the first action-adventure movies of its time. Johnny played the jungle hero, Tarzan, and the role would define his career for years to come. It wasn't just Johnny's muscles and athleticism that made him the perfect Tarzan. There was something about him that audiences loved. He had this charm. Even though Tarzan barely spoke English in the movies, Johnny's portrayal connected with people. His co-star, Maureen O'Sullivan, played Jane in 6 of those Tarzan movies from 1932 to 1942. The chemistry between Johnny and Maureen made their characters even more believable. And of course, we can't forget the famous Tarzan yell, a wild echoing sound that became Johnny's signature. Funny enough, that yell wasn't exactly his own. It was created by a sound expert, Douglas Shearer, who took Johnny's normal voice, played with the pitch, and then reversed it to give it that iconic sound. But in the eyes of fans, it was all Johnny. The Tarzan the Ape Man movie was such a hit that Johnny went on to play the role in 12 Tarzan films. Every time, he swung from vines, wrestled wild animals, and won over audiences with that primal charm. His portrayal of Tarzan was so popular that even Edgar Rice Burroughs, the author of the original books, took notice. Burroughs was happy with Johnny's casting, but there was one thing he wasn't thrilled about: the way the movies portrayed Tarzan's language skills. In the books, Tarzan was much more articulate, but in the films, he could barely string together full sentences. Burroughs didn't like that change, so he created his own Tarzan film series, starring another actor named Herman Brix, who played a more well-spoken version of the character. But no matter how true to the books Brix was, for most people, Johnny was the real Tarzan. Interestingly, when Johnny was first asked to play Tarzan, he was already under contract with BVD, a company that made men's underwear. He was modeling their products, and at first it seemed like there might be a conflict. But MGM, the studio behind the Tarzan films, made a deal with BVD. They agreed to feature some of their big actresses like Greta Garbo and Marie Dressler in BVD ads, which allowed Johnny to step out of his underwear model role and swing into his new career as Tarzan. After playing Tarzan for years, Johnny decided it was time for a change, but he didn't stray far from the jungle. In the late 1940s, he took on a new role as Jungle Jim. Now, if you've never heard of Jungle Jim, don't worry. He wasn't as famous as Tarzan, but he was still a big deal for Johnny. Jungle Jim was an adventurer, and Johnny played him in 16 movies over 8 years. It was kind of like a continuation of the Tarzan character, but with a more human touch. Instead of swinging from vines, Jungle Jim was more likely to outsmart his enemies and rescue people from danger. Jungle Jim didn't just stop with the movies. The character moved to television, and Johnny starred in 26 episodes of the Jungle Jim TV series. It was clear that Johnny had found his niche. Whether it was as Tarzan or Jungle Jim, audiences loved seeing him take on the wilds, and he thrived in those roles. He played the jungle hero for so long that it became a big part of his public identity. But after 2 decades of playing larger-than-life characters, Johnny decided to hang up his loincloth for good. In 1957, he retired from acting. Johnny Weissmuller wasn't just a Hollywood star or an Olympic champion. He was also a hero in real life. You might be surprised to learn that he saved quite a few lives along the way. One of the most remarkable moments came in 1927, long before he became famous as Tarzan. It was during his training for the Chicago Marathon. While out on Lake Michigan, Johnny found himself in the middle of a real-life disaster. A boat called the Favorite, a small excursion boat carrying women and children, had capsized. It was a beautiful day at first, but a sudden squall hit the lake, flipping the boat and throwing its passengers into the water. 75 people were on that boat when it went under, and panic spread fast. Most of them couldn't swim, and the situation quickly turned into a life-or-death struggle. Now, Johnny was a lifeguard at the time, and he wasn't about to sit back and do nothing. With his strong swimming skills and quick thinking, Johnny jumped into action. He dove into the water over and over, pulling people to safety. In total, 27 people drowned that day, including 16 children. But Johnny and other rescuers managed to save more than 50 others. Johnny himself saved 11 lives, pulling them from the cold, choppy water and getting them to safety. But while Johnny was saving lives and breaking swimming records, his personal life was a lot more complicated. You see, Johnny was married not just once or twice, but 5 times. His first marriage was to a band and club singer named Bobby Arnst. They got married in 1931, but the relationship didn't last long. They divorced just 2 years later in 1933. Not too long after that, Johnny married actress Lupe Velez, who was known as the Mexican Spitfire because of her fiery personality. That marriage was as dramatic as it sounds. They had a passionate but tumultuous relationship and ended up divorcing in 1939. Johnny's third wife, Beryl Scott, came into the picture soon after. They got married in 1939 and had 3 children together: Johnny Weissmuller Jr., Wendy Ann Weissmuller, and Heidi Elizabeth Weissmuller. But even though it seemed like Johnny had found some stability, this marriage also didn't last. They divorced in 1948. A few years later, in 1948, Johnny married again, this time to Eileen Gates. They stayed married for a little over a decade before calling it quits in 1962. Finally, in 1963, Johnny married his 5th and last wife, Maria Gertrude Baumann. They stayed together for the rest of Johnny's life, until he passed away in 1984. With Maria, Johnny also gained a stepdaughter, Lisa Weissmuller Gallagher. Now let's talk a bit about Johnny's children, especially his son, Johnny Weissmuller Jr. Born in 1940 to Johnny and his third wife, Beryl, Weissmuller Jr. grew up with some pretty big shoes to fill. He didn't just have a famous dad, he had Tarzan for a dad. Can you imagine the kind of expectations that would come with that? Like his father, Weissmuller Jr. was a talented swimmer, and he even joined the swim team at the University of Southern California. Over the years, Weissmuller Jr. had a few other acting roles like in American Graffiti and THX 1138, and he even did some stunt work. He also made guest appearances on TV shows like The Streets of San Francisco. One of Weissmuller Jr.'s more unique roles came when he provided the voice for Tarzan in an English-dubbed version of an X-rated cartoon called Tarzoon, Shame of the Jungle. He also wrote a memoir titled Tarzan, My Father, which was published in 2002. In the book, he shared personal stories about growing up as the son of such an iconic figure, offering a peek behind the curtain into the life of the real Johnny Weissmuller. Weissmuller Jr. spent the later years of his life in San Francisco, where he worked as a longshoreman and took part in yacht races from California to Hawaii. He died in 2006 from liver cancer at the age of 65, leaving behind his own legacy and memories of growing up in the shadow of Tarzan. Unfortunately, Johnny Weissmuller's own health began to decline in the 1970s. In 1974, he broke both his hip and leg, and this injury seemed to mark the beginning of his struggles. Even though he was always known for his physical strength and fitness, Johnny learned that he had a serious heart condition. By 1977, Johnny suffered a series of strokes which further weakened him. In 1979, things got worse, and Johnny had to spend time in the motion picture and television country house and hospital in California, a place where many retired actors go when they need extra care. After a few weeks there, Johnny and his wife Maria moved to Acapulco, Mexico. This move must have felt bittersweet. Acapulco was the setting for Johnny's last Tarzan movie, but now it became the place where he would spend his final years. Johnny Weissmuller passed away on January 20, 1984, at the age of 79. The cause of death was pulmonary edema, which is a buildup of fluid in the lungs, a condition that makes it hard to breathe and can be life-threatening. His death marked the end of an era, but even in death, Johnny went out in a way that was true to his legendary status. At his request, as his coffin was lowered into the ground, the famous Tarzan yell played 3 times. It's almost like he wanted the world to remember that even though he was gone, his larger-than-life spirit would echo on forever. Johnny was buried just outside Acapulco at the Valley of the Light Cemetery, and he didn't go quietly. Thanks to Senator Ted Kennedy and President Ronald Reagan, Johnny was honored with a 21-gun salute, something usually reserved for heads of state. But in many ways, Johnny was just that, a king of his own jungle. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed learning about Johnny Weissmuller and his incredible life, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below. Also, hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on our future videos.